joining us for Meet the Professionals. Today we have Scott Eron joining us. Scott, it is so great to have you here. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for having me. This is exciting.
I'm so excited. So let's get started. Can you start by telling us, what is your job? What do you do? What is your role? And maybe take us a little bit through your history of how you got here.
Sure, yeah. So currently, I'm a scientist in biotech, and that could mean like a million different things. So maybe what I'll do is like kind of walk through what that means a little bit and kind of break that down, and then go through how I got here, and how Scott stumbled into the position that he's in now. Yeah. So what is biotech? Like, what does that mean? I think of like biotech in the pharmaceutical industry in general as like a place where companies and like teams of people work together to make a drug to with some focus, right? And that drug is focused on either curing or curbing some disease, some specific disease. And so for me and all of my experience in biotech has been in the oncology field, so in cancer. A lot of this is like these kind of specific medicines for specific cancers. That's like the new thing that folks are working on. Right. You hear about like chemotherapy or radiation therapy, right? That's all like kind of more general. But there's been a lot of recent advances, and people are now starting to focus on, oh, you have this particular lung cancer or this triple negative breast cancer. So what can we design or drug can we make for that specific thing? So that's kind of where I'm coming from. And then, but the biotech industry, pharmaceutical industry goes beyond that. It's not just oncology. You've probably seen commercials for things like Humira, right? So that's like, they're very active on television. And so that's for like inflammation. So rheumatoid arthritis or psoriasis. So stuff that's like not like this life-threatening like cancer, but drug discovery deals in that space. And then I think the other one worth mentioning is like vaccines, so preventing, and that's something we're all, I think, very familiar with recently. Biotechs like to move fast and take risks and really push hard to kind of produce results. So that's a lot of the job that I'm in now. So it's very different every day, and I'm sure that we'll talk about that down the line. But it makes it really exciting. So no 2 days are the same. It's exciting. It's exciting to be tangent to patients, in a sense, but it's also risky. And so I think this is something to keep in mind. So, for example, when to develop a drug is what they estimate now something like $2.6 billion. So it's a lot of money to make like one drug. And then on top of that, something like 90% of clinical trials fail. So if you're lucky enough to make it to that stage where the FDA gives you approval to test your drugs in humans, 90% fail. So it's a very risky kind of high-powered, intense environment, but it's also that's what makes it fun. Throughout the drug discovery process, there are a lot of people with a lot of different expertise. And so I fit in as a scientist early in that stage. So I'm not in the clinic or a clinician or an MD or anything like that. I fit in early where we say, how can we investigate what this specific, let's say cancer, how can we target that? And then see if we can develop it enough and make it safe enough to put it into a person. And so throughout that whole process, where I'm going with this is there's a lot of people in a big team, and they all have different expertise where they're like very different types of scientists, and they all need to come together in order for this to kind of work out. And so my role is a structural biologist. So that's, we can dive into how that plays into things later. But you also asked like how I got to where I am today. And so I think in my high school, I had kind of this crazy chemistry teacher who was pretty eccentric and interesting. And he kind of turned me on to science and chemistry. And only when I really understood that did I understand all the different applications and jobs that can come with a chemistry degree. And so I think going back to that drug discovery pipeline, all these different people started with chemistry and biology and these like kind of basic understandings, and then they get these specialties throughout the process to get to that expertise that they have today so that we can all come together and make a drug. And so my path after that was explored chemistry in my undergrad at SUNY Geneseo. So that might be something, the SUNY system, I think maybe some of the folks in the library might be familiar with. And then I went on and decided to get my PhD. So I thought that I had a general understanding of chemistry and biology, but I needed a more in-depth. I had too many questions and was too curious, and I needed to specialize. So I went and got a PhD in chemistry, technically, even though some of my, you get more and more particular focused on one question, and that was structural biology. That took about 6 years. When I finished that, I started networking quite a bit, met some folks who were at a company that needed a structural biologist, got really lucky, worked for them for about 6 years, learned a lot there, not only just about industry in general, but about science. Managing people was something you never really get taught. So that's another like layer to everything in industry. And then just recently in January, I moved jobs to a new company where I'm at now. So I'm still kind of getting used to things and excited about the new science. Been here for about 8 months. So it's kind of a long-winded answer to your question.
That was a fantastic answer. And I feel like that was a really good overview of what you do. So going back to high school you a little bit. So you said you were
Mhm,
really interested in science, right? And that is
mhm.
what sort of started you down this career path. Specifically chemistry. Is there any other, let me see how I want to phrase this. So one of our questions later on is like, what kind of education, training, technical knowledge, or experience is necessary for this kind of work? So maybe would you talk a little bit about that? You started with high school chemistry, then you studied chemistry, you got your PhD. Is a PhD required for something like this, or just a
Mhm.
general undergrad, master's degree?
Sure. Yeah. So this is definitely a loaded question and is definitely changing every year, I would say. But what doesn't change is that there's certain fundamentals that I think need to, and understanding that you need to have in order to excel in like the sciences. And so chemistry, biology, and math, I think, are critical that I still use every day to have that like base layer or fundamental knowledge in order to propel you to the next level, wherever you want to go, wherever you fit in either that drug discovery pipeline or any of the many chemistry jobs that are out there. And so I would say that, if we go back to, all right, let's say we're in biotech, in Scott, where, Scott lives every day. He uses this chemistry, biology, math every day. But what degree do you need to succeed, right? Where do people like to fit in? And so I would say, maybe even just 10 or 15 years ago, it was like basically this unspoken thing. It was required that you got a PhD and that you did a postdoc. So that's 4 years of undergrad, 5 to 6 years in a PhD, and then 1 to 5 more years as a postdoc. So you're starting your career in industry at 30 something. And that has really changed lately. That is no longer the case. So I will say that a lot of folks are getting hired right out of their PhD. So postdocs are becoming less common. And then even more folks are coming right out of undergrad and saying, you know what? I don't want to specialize in that one thing and spend those 5, 6 years learning like these specific things. I'm just going to jump into industry and learn on the job. And I think that that's absolutely one way you can go. If you are ready for that and you have a drive, there's definitely room for you in science and in industry. Um, what I will say though is that a PhD definitely unlocks or at least raises the ceiling, I think, a little bit more. And again, this is changing. A lot of folks used to be, you came out of undergrad, you maybe had a ceiling where you could get to a certain level. And then some, people would ask, like, oh, but you don't have a PhD. So do you, how high up on this ladder can you go? But I think that's changing now. People are really showing that, a lot of hard work, learning on the job, thinking, reading outside of your job, and just kind of general working hard, that those ceilings are shattering and you can do that with either one.
That is very reassuring because I know some teens right now might be thinking, oh, that's a lot of school to go through.
Right. Yeah, it
Yeah,
is. It is.
but that is reassuring to hear. Okay,
Mm,
so I'd like to go back to talk about a little bit of what is your typical work day like, or a work week, or is there an equivalent, like maybe a cycle, a span? Yeah.
Sure. Yeah, so I will say that my current company is very small. I think there's like ten of us. And so that the kind of advantage to that is that we can be nimble, work fast, and do the things we need to do. But it certainly means that my everyday is different. And so I don't think this goes for every industry job. There are some where it's a little more structured and, I'm going to come in, do this experiment, work up the data and communicate it. Then the next day you come in, work up the data, do but where I am currently, it's very, it's all over the place and it's a lot of fun. So I'll say in general, what you do is you spend a lot of time in the lab and then you balance that with, I'm in the lab, I make these discoveries, I work up the data, analyze it however you need to, and then I communicate with the team. So you're basically 50-50 of working in the lab and in meetings or making, presentations to share what you've learned and how that kind of gels with the goals of the company and everyone's working together to do that. But it is fun that, every day is different and fast paced. And, sometimes it's more lab based. Sometimes you need to make more presentations or there's a board meeting. So you got to like get prepared to show them all your progress. And then other days it's more like logistics, like how do I ship this package to Europe? So, that's what I really like about it is it can be a lot of different things all packed into one week. And so it makes it a lot of fun.
Just for my own curiosity, when you're in the lab working, is that like a very solitary thing? Is it just you and your research, or is it a collaborative environment? Are many people working on the same thing?
I think that depends on your position. I'd say for me, just in the nature of structural biology, it's just, yeah, it is solitary. But we have a lot of biologists that work in what we call a tissue culture room. So it's a room that's like separate from everything else where they're working on specific cells that they're engineering to do a specific function. And so they can't have us contaminating these cells, right? So they're in the separate room and they're all working together, sitting at these hoods for, hours at a time. So they, I've found that they're very friendly places. A lot of times you hear music blaring from there. So I think it can go a lot of different ways and it depends on the kind of the nature of the work and the experiment. But in a lot of times, these days, a lot of open concepts. So, I'm in the lab, I get to see everybody who's in there, you're pipetting and you're just talking to your neighbor. So it is a friendly space, but sometimes the particular thing you might be working on is a little more focused than just what you're doing that day.
Okay. That is really cool. Yeah. And that's also, I feel like that's important for teams to know too, because some people are just very introverted and just want to be by themselves. And some people crave that interaction and have to be around people 24/7. So it's a good sense. It's good to know what kind of thing you're getting into, what kind of
Mhm.
environment. Also,
Mhm.
when you said pipetting, that brought me back to my high school days. I
Yeah,
actually remembered
right.
what that was.
Yeah, we still do that.
Yeah, that is
Yeah.
really cool. So my next question for you is, what do you like best and what do you like least about your job?
Yeah.
Very
Okay.
big
So
question.
this is a big one. And this is fun. Okay. I'll try to stay on task here. So I think we'll start with the best part. And for me, I think that's a really easy one. And that's just being part of a team that's all focused on a common goal, which is, help patients with this disease, right? We all are at the end of the day trying to cure or curb some disease. And, I think that, oncology is one that has affected everyone, whether you like it or not, in your life. And so it definitely motivates me. And I know it motivates all of my lab mates and everyone I work with to, push harder and come up with something that we can do together to help someone. Even if it's just one patient once, that would be incredible. Like people talk about how it's so hard to get a drug approved that, if you've ever been on a team that has had an approved drug, like you talk about it, it's a big deal and everyone is like so interested. So I think that for me is one of the best. And yeah, so then we'll leave it there. Okay, so that's the best part of my job, I'd say. The thing I like least is probably the business or the balance of business and science. And so, I'm just a very curious person, and everyone in the industry really who's, come this far is just super curious and loves science, um, solving problems and stuff like that. And so, sometimes you are working on a problem and it turns out, or some disease indication, and it turns out, you know what, we can't work on this anymore for a business reason. And then you have to take all that hard work and just set it to the side, say, okay, and work on the next thing. And so that's really hard because you can solve it, or it's just right there. You need to know more, and you just have to set it aside. And it could be for a number of reasons. It could be because someone down the street already solved that problem. And you're like, oh, well, okay, I guess we'll have to move on to something else. Or it could just be that, hey, we're working on two things, and, it's a tough, financial climate. We have to pick one. So we only have the money for one thing. Which one do we pick? So I think for me, that's the hardest part, and a lot of unsolved mysteries, let's say, just kind of get left on the bench, and that's tough sometimes.
Do you ever get to go back to some of the unsolved mysteries? It doesn't ever happen.
Sometimes, yeah, every once in a while. So what's interesting about it is sometimes let's say you have a mystery that, or some puzzle that you guys haven't been able to quite crack, you might go back and write it up as a paper and say, hey, scientific community, we worked on this and we got this far, and here's our results. Check it out. Kind of let us know what you think, and then give them that information to ask their own questions or take it whatever direction they want to take it in. Because I do feel like a lot of the science we do, and it's so competitive, that you don't share it often. And the whole point of science is to share and like learn together, your materials, your methods, everything like that. And so you don't always get to do that. So when you do get to do that, it's a really big deal. So that's
That is
nice.
really cool. I have just two quick points for you. A question from something you said earlier.
Sure.
How many years does it normally take for a drug to go from development to approval? I'm assuming it's different for every drug.
It is, and the range is very large. The average is somewhere like 10 to 14 years. So it's a long time, and it's a lot of work by a lot of different people. I think the span if you look this up, they'll say like 3 to 14 years or something like that. And I mean, that might be changing now. I mean, like for example, the COVID vaccine was like a world record of fastest, to market because of the pressures of the world, really, and the just crazy technology that they were able to all piece together to solve this problem. But yeah, most of the time it's very long. So you have a long development process. Then you have this process where you have to make sure that it's safe, before, and then the FDA comes in and says, all right, we think it's safe. You can test it in humans. And then your clinical trials start, and you got to do phase 1, phase 2, phase 3. It can take 10 years. It can take longer. So yeah, it's all billions of dollars and lots of time and money. So it's definitely a lot. A lot
That
goes
is
into it.
crazy. That is a lot longer than I thought.
Mm.
So I want to jump a little bit to a question that I had later on about technology, since you mentioned technology before. So how has
Mhm.
technology impacted your job as it's changed over the years? I want to say it's gotten easier. I would hope easier.
Oh yeah. Oh man, this is like one of my favorite questions. So I can talk all day about this, but I'll try and keep it contained. So yes, absolutely. Technology has certainly changed, not just for me, but for all of the science community. And so there's been these like just really incredible inventions that have, accelerated our ability to ask different questions or solve different problems. And so I can give you an example of a few of them. So one that I just absolutely love is this idea of, it's called acoustic dispensing. So what you can do is we work with everything you do is in volumes, right? And so the smaller that you can make different reactions, or that you can make your experiments, the more experiments you can do, because the less volume things you need. And so they've invented this thing called an echo, which uses acoustic dispensing. So it basically uses sound to push liquid, from basically one plate to another one, and can dispense like 2.5 nanoliters at a time, which is just a crazy small amount of liquid. In fact, when I learned about this in grad school, some guy from industry was in telling us all about it. And I raised my hand and said, I don't believe you that you can dispense such a small amount accurately. It's just wild. But he proved me wrong. And I use one in the lab nowadays every once in a while. And so it's like just a wild technology. And so I was trying to equate this to something that maybe is like understandable. So if you think about a mosquito, if you let a mosquito suck up some of your blood, that's they estimate that it's around 5 microliters of blood. So this is 2,000 times less volume that you can accurately dispense. So it's just absolutely crazy. So that's super cool. So it makes things go from like high throughput to super high throughput in my mind in terms of assays that you can run. Other things that are really cool are like the robotics, just in general, where you can have hundreds or thousands of samples, where before you might have had to do them one by one to get into the instrument or do whatever you needed. But nowadays you can just put them in and some robot will take care of it. And you can come back the next day and say, hey, what are my results? Let me go analyze this data. So that sort of thing is pretty cool. Advances in sequencing have been absolutely just, wild and enabling. So this idea of the human genome, right? Sequencing that, or sequencing folks who are sick or with cancer and saying, oh, we can help with that diagnosis. This is what's going wrong with you. We have a drug that does this specific thing, rather than just you're sick in general. Let's just give you some, radiation or something like horrible. So that I think advances in sequencing and our ability to do that has been top notch. And then for me, and this is probably the one that most people want to hear about, for me personally, in like my field, one of the biggest advances is in AI, so artificial intelligence, which everyone's talking about these days. And so one of the big advances is something called AlphaFold. And so this is from I think the Google folks, called DeepMind. And so for any of the nerds listening, DeepMind was the company that made the like AI presence in like video games, and like was able to beat all the best human video gamers for like StarCraft, for example. So same company, and they've developed this really phenomenal technology to predict the three-dimensional structure of proteins. And so what does that kind of mean? So I'll give a little bit of background here. So in every one of our cells, we have little machines that do all of the work that keep us healthy. And when they do their job correctly, we stay healthy. And so these little machines all are called proteins. And so in order to, if something goes wrong with one of them, it usually leads to some disease. So in order to study that disease, we need to study that particular protein or that particular machine. And so in order to really do that, we need to know what they look like. And so for my job is to, as a structural biologist, that's actually my job. What do these proteins, these little machines look like? And then if we can understand what they look like, we can understand what they, how that structure leads to their particular function, or maybe what's wrong with that function. And that's why you have a disease. So I think of it like a spring. Like if you didn't know what a spring looked like, and you had a machine with a spring in it, it would be a lot harder to understand. But if you knew what that spring looked like and was inside, you'd be like, oh, of course, this is how that works. And so this AlphaFold program has been able to predict what each of these little machines look like, and done it with incredible accuracy. And so that advance has just been really cool to watch, and just come out very recently. And so having a big impact in my field in particular, but just in general on biology and structural biology. So yes, technology has absolutely changed my job, and will probably change it again, in the next few months with something new and crazy that has come out.
That is so fascinating. And I love hearing about this because at the library, it's very simple. Computers changed the way we did things. We went from card catalogs to digital online systems. So I love hearing everyone's equivalent of that. And I'm really glad you brought up the AI part too, because we've been getting a lot of questions here from teens about that, about using it. How can they incorporate it into their work? How can it make their lives easier as they go forward? So they're going to love hearing about that.
Great, great.
Okay, let's see. We did technology. Okay, this is another interesting question. Are there certain times of years that are busier for you than others by the nature of this job?
Not so much, honestly. It's kind of just there's ebbs and flows in every program and that need your particular expertise versus just um kind of routine day-to-day stuff. So I wouldn't say there's any particular time of year. Maybe someone will schedule a board meeting, and so leading up to that, you have to like get a lot of data and like trying to impress them. But I wouldn't say any time is particularly more than another.
That is good to know because I'm like with teachers, it's back to school. With the library, we're busy in summer. So just any sense of that is good to know.
Mhm.
My other question for you, so beyond your degrees, is there any special licenses or certifications that are required for this job?
Um, I don't think so. Um, yeah, not really. It's mostly just kind of a basic understanding of, yeah, like chemistry,
The
biology,
science
and
and
math.
chemistry.
And then yeah, you can kind of get away with an undergrad, BS. You can do a PhD, you can get masters. There's a lot of different options there, and all of them are nice, really nice intros to get you um into this field. But I don't think there's anything particular. Yeah.
That is always good to know. Okay, so switching sort of to the advice portion of this.
Yeah.
Um, what subjects from high school would you say you use the most besides science? I know you mentioned you write your papers, when you're sharing things with the scientific community. So would you say English is good to know? Foreign language, maybe business, any other subjects that you would tell teens who are interested in taking this career path to focus on as well?
Yeah, I guess math is a big one besides the sciences like, biology, chemistry. I think math is just having that kind of fundamental understanding of math. And then actually, another big one is statistics. So I don't know if that's kind of taught in high schools these days, but in college, maybe a statistics class. The problem with statistics is that it's notoriously boring. So it's tough to, but it's like can be very useful in this particular job and in science in general. You need to show that what you're doing is different than, the control group. And so you need to say it's statistically significant, right? And what's a p-value? How does that work? How do we know it's different? How many trials do you need to run before you can confidently say ours is different or no, actually they're the same? So that's one I would say. Not too much in terms of foreign language, but yeah, writing can definitely come into play, but it's interesting because it's different style. I feel like science writing is very different than creative writing. But reading and writing definitely have their place, and being proficient in those is very important. Um, and then, yeah, from a business perspective, yeah, I mean, a lot of folks knowing that is not a bad thing. Anything about that in that field, and I've known people who go from scientists in the lab to, hey, what is this? MBA, they go get their MBA, they study business, and then with that underlying knowledge of science, they can be that much more effective on the business side and ask the right questions. And get scientists in the room and say, what are the liabilities here? And if they really understand the problem, it can be really helpful. So yeah, any sort of business kind of background is probably to your advantage.
That is great. Just a few more questions for you.
Sure.
So, second to last question, are there any resources or places to look for jobs? I know you mentioned that you've been through 2 companies now. Is there like a database of jobs for this field specifically, or is it more of, just networking, meeting people? How do you go about getting your first job?
Yeah. I, this is a tough one because it is so much of who you know, and that's, I know, not what anybody wants to hear, and it can be like such a barrier. But things like LinkedIn are really nice to get a sense of, you know, what's out there, what companies exist, and kind of what their roles are offered. And then a lot of times, actually, you can even it's nice to just read a job description and say, like, what is an analytical chemist at Amgen do? And you're like, oh, okay, let me read about that. What are the things that they're listing as required for this job? Okay, if I need that, maybe I need when I'm in, doing my undergrad, maybe I should be focused on take that PChem class or all these different types of chemistry that you can learn. So I think that's one resource. But yeah, I think networking is huge. And so that's how I got my first job. I went to a bunch of conferences, started meeting people, asking questions, and ended up going to lunch with someone at this one company. And um, at the end of our lunch, he said something like, so where do you want to be in 5 years? And I was like, oh, I thought we were just talking science, but I think this is an interview. So, and then that's where I ended up working. So for 6 years. So, yeah, I think just reaching out to people. One other advice I might give that I did uh, mostly in grad school, but I think anyone can do it anytime. Is do what's called an informational interview. I don't know if you've ever, yeah. So I did this a couple of times. I thought maybe I wanted to go into a couple different fields and take my chemistry degree here, here, here. So I asked around if anyone knew, someone in, let's say, patent law, right? I was interested in doing that. So it turned out one of the professors had a neighbor who was in patent law. So I just called them and I didn't want a job. I said right off the bat, I don't want a job. I just want to talk. What's your, what is your job like doing this essentially? And learning about that job. And I think that is a really nice resource for understanding if that's the direction you want to go in and just making connections in general, because maybe they can help you talk to that next person who knows, we have an opening, and then you can slide in there. So,
Absolutely. I'm glad to hear that informational interviews are still a thing. I know some teens have mentioned them, but people are very afraid of like picking up the phone and calling people these days.
yeah, I
But it's
know.
just something, it's a very useful skill that the more you do it, the better you get at it. And it's great.
Mhm.
Oh, and there was something else that you said too that I wanted to call out. Sorry, go ahead.
I was just going to add, if anyone from, the sphere of the library wants to do something like that, I'm happy to talk to anyone. So you can get my information and open up to folks, because I know it was really helpful for me. So I'd be happy to spend 30 minutes and talk to anyone curious enough.
Thank you. That's really great. Thank you so much. We'll put some information at the bottom of the video.
Great.
Thank you.
Hmm.
And there was something else I wanted to call out. Oh, a point that you made earlier that I thought was really great and would never have occurred to me is looking up the job descriptions and then seeing what you can do with that. Like maybe there's a class you could go and take that you hadn't thought
Hmm.
about taking before. That's such a great idea.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of opportunity there. And like when they put, like, I've written job descriptions before, you're very deliberate, right? I need someone that can do this thing. So you put it on there, right? And so if you're in like, I might want to apply for a job next year in this kind of field, you can start to break it down and be like, wow, I keep seeing this same, high throughput assays. How do I get experience in a high throughput assay? What is that? Who do I talk? So it's just a place to look or point to, or start looking, researching. I don't know.
That is fantastic advice. Like that never would have occurred to me, or I've never heard anyone else that I've spoken to say something like that either. It's so
Nice.
helpful.
Yeah, thanks.
Okay, my last question for you. What advice would you give to a teen looking to follow in your footsteps, or would you go back and give to young Scott back in the day?
Um, yeah, okay. So the first thing I would say is not, you know, not all jobs are MDs. Like you don't have to go to pre-med and be a physician, right? Like there's a lot you can do with a degree in science. So many jobs out there for that. And so yeah, think think beyond that, Scott, is what I would say. Because it's so, I will be pre-med, I will be a doctor, this will be the thing. But there's so much more. So I'd start with that. And then I'd also say, you know, get hands-on experience, because I feel like the lab is not for everyone. But it can also, you might not be sure if you want to do that, but then you might start and be like, oh my gosh, this is so fun. And so I think getting any experience you can, outside of the normal lab, that's either associated with high school or a lot of undergrads will do that. And it's tough sometimes to get your foot in the door somewhere, but if you can talk to your teacher or your professor about any sort of activity that you can do, or maybe they know someone in a lab and you can go there and just make buffers for an hour a week or something, or just to learn. I think getting your hands wet, getting those experiences, any sort of internship or co-op is just extremely beneficial. Um, so that would be another bit of advice I would say to folks, um, and see if the lab is for you. And if it's not, there are a lot of jobs in my field and in the biotech industry that where you're not hands-on, and you can do computational chemistry, you can do medicinal chemistry. A lot of those folks can do that from their desk at home. So yeah, get out there and explore. And then just read is another one I would probably say, because I didn't really realize how much was out there. And so if you can, again, ask folks in the know, or if you want reading material, I'd be happy to give, if you have something specific, I can point you in that direction, because that's the best way to learn. Um, so those might be three things I'd say. Yeah.
They're all fantastic pieces of advice. Okay, that was my last question, but is there anything else that you want to throw out there? Any bit that something you wanted to say that you didn't get a chance to say?
Yeah, I guess maybe one other thing I would say is, if you're like into science and you're just curious, I would say don't ever restrict yourself. And so my example is when I started in my undergrad, I did lead selenide quantum dot uh, synthesis to make like solar cells. And so that was this really particular type of chemistry. And then when I started my PhD, like I went there to do more of that specific type of chemistry. So I picked a school, I had a professor in mind. I'm going to do more of that. And then all the professors give a little spiel about what their lab does. And this one woman talked about cell death. And it was just like the craziest, coolest thing I'd ever heard. And I wanted to learn all about cell death. So I basically stopped all of the chemistry and the lead selenide quantum dots. And I said, I need to learn biology. So I got a biology textbook. I joined her lab, worked hard to prove to her that I could do it and I could learn. And then now I'm a structural biologist, right? I don't do chemistry anymore. So yeah, if you're curious and something like inspires you or like gets you kind of fired up, like explore that further. Just because you're doing one thing does not mean you can't ever switch or learn something new. Because and for me, when you stop learning something, when you stop learning, it's time to do the next thing. So yeah, that might be my last bit of advice. Just be curious and have some fun out there, because there's just a lot to learn and know and do, and go find the thing that really gets you excited and gets you fired up. So that's what I'd
That
say.
is fantastic. Thank you. That was a really great advice. And when you're done learning, learn the next thing. That is fantastic advice.
Thanks.
Yeah, so that is all I have. Thank you so much for taking the time to speak with
Yeah.
us. Thank you for offering to do informational interviews. If anyone has any questions, they can reach out to the team department and we'll put you in contact with Scott. So thank you again.